And we're going. What's up? We got Ryan and Luke. How you guys doing?
Hey.
Good. Thanks for having us on your show, man.
Yeah, of course. So you guys have, well, you have your own show.
We
What is
do.
it? Okay, so what's the name of your show? How do you pronounce it correctly?
It's C-ID.
Yes.
Okay.
So
ID.
SEEID period.
Okay, where did that name come from?
So the word in Latin, ibid, I-B-I-D, means same. So if you read a law review article or a case, they'll refer to a source, right? So you'll name one source, and then if you want to say the same source again, you'll say id.
Yeah.
Ibid.
So Luke and I were on law review together. We're both law students at the University of Iowa. We're in our final semester, thank God. But last year on law review, what we would do, 2 nights a week, is spend about 6 hours reviewing articles, going through footnotes and making sure all the footnotes were exactly correct, that they supported the assertion that was being cited. And if you ever got a packet of footnotes, because you do about like 10 footnotes per packet, maybe on average, if you got a packet that was full of id citations or C-id citations, it made it really, really easy because it kept citing to the same source over and over and over again. So getting a bunch of id citations was like something that was really exciting for us. And so we figured that law students and lawyers would be like, oh, yeah, C-id. They would, click with them.
Okay, that's good. So that I shouldn't feel bad for that going right over my head then.
Yeah, no. It's kind of it's a legal thing, and our show is a legal podcast, so it's kind of an inside joke. And one of our first episodes, I think we talk about why we call it what we did. So hop on over to our podcast and listen. You guys can find out.
Right. Available on iTunes, Stitcher, everywhere you listen to your podcast.
Yeah, we're on iTunes, Stitcher. We're not on Spotify. We're working on that.
Oh, okay.
But
Get that.
iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Overcast, PlayPod, all those good things.
Sweet. Right on.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So, so is your podcast kind of targeted towards like me, like the general population, or who's it for, I guess?
It's kind of, I think a lot of it is sort of law students, trying to connect with them.
On the other hand, the reason we started the podcast was because we wanted to kind of break down complex legal ideas that we feel anybody should probably have a basic grasp about. So, from my perspective, I think it is targeted toward everybody, because I think if you want to be a civically minded person, especially in today's crazy climate, it's important to know the framework that you're working in, right? That really understanding the system should precede coming to an opinion about a political position. So knowing what the Equal Protection Clause means really matters. Knowing what due process is really matters. And having a basic understanding of those frameworks really helps inform why people's opinions are what they are.
I think we try and make it as engaging and educational as possible. So yeah, anyone can hop into it.
Yeah, and it's not overly dense. There are some things that, you want to be engaged and you want to learn. We do one, for example, I think episode 6 was about how a lawsuit works. And lawsuits are obviously very complicated. So that one gets a little dense. On the other hand, we have our 5th episode, which was about this kid who rode a sled down a hill and broke their leg. And there ended up being a really large lawsuit because the leg ended up getting cut off. But it's one of the first cases we talk about in torts. And it's this thing called the eggshell skull rule. Basically, what happened was these 2 kids were in a classroom. It's like a one-room schoolhouse, okay? Mm-hmm. And one kid kind of knocks into the other kid's leg. And it's nothing big. They're not roughhousing. They're just, kind of, I don't know, joking around, right? Well, just knocking into that leg started a huge infection in that kid's leg. Jeez. And the question was, who's liable, even though the kid couldn't have necessarily foreseen that sort of injury. Mm-hmm. He didn't know that the kid had a huge infection in his leg, that if you just bump into it, it was going to cause major damage. So should he be at fault? Right. And so the eggshell skull rule says, yeah, you take your defendant as they are. And, if there are unforeseen consequences, that's too bad. You're liable for it. So,
wow.
Yeah. So that one is pretty interesting. It's like, this really colorful story about these little kids sliding down this sled, and was it the 1800s?
Yeah, late 19th century.
Late 19th century, and we kind of, tell a story. So the episodes are varied. There's like storytelling episodes, and then there's more like, hey, here's some law you should know.
Right. I see. And it's like something everybody almost inevitably is going to have to deal with some sort of law or legal case in life, it seems like.
Yeah.
Right. And this is just like understanding the basic concepts, I think, as it helps you be better informed about what's happening in the world now. A lot of constitutional issues. I think we've talked about people should engage with those things. People should understand the basis of those. Also, I think what we do well is try to separate law from like politics. Politics is obviously any time is a political moment, but particularly now. But we're not trying to move the needle on anything or advocate for a position. We're just sort of talking about what the law is, and whether you want to change the law or not, that's more of a political thing.
Yeah, that's a policy situation. Like, if you think 3-strike laws are good or bad, that's more of a policy position, but how it works is a legal issue. And so we try not to advocate policy things too much. Obviously, we have our own political positions, and we don't like pretend that we don't, because that would be fake and not cool. But we acknowledge our position, and we try to talk about, there's maybe more conservative jurists or conservative legal scholars who believe X, and here's why they believe X, and here's where they base it in the Constitution, and here's why that's good or bad, and here's the pros and cons of that. And so we get into kind of the muddiness of the legal system, which is also an important thing that people should know. So we try to give people a place where they can come and learn and really think about, if a law is discriminating against somebody, what does that actually mean constitutionally, and is it actually legal? I mean, sometimes it very well may be. It might be not. For example, if you're discriminating against a group of people and it's not a protected class, it might be legal. If it's a protected class, it gets touchier. Like, discrimination based on sex is very different than discrimination based on race. We have different standards, and one is higher than the other, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. So, we just try to lay it out there and let people make up their minds for themselves.
Yeah. Whew. Yeah. I mean, just hearing that, man, it's incredibly complex, and there's so much to it. So, yeah, it's gnarly. But yeah, if people can just kind of get a basic understanding of it and have an idea of what's going on and how things work, really, and then leave all the incredibly minute details to you guys, that works great too.
Yeah, people can always go to our website and comment and ask us questions too. We check our website for comments on our episodes, things like that. So if somebody listens to an episode and they have questions, they should reach out to us. We're happy to answer them.
Sweet. Awesome. Love that. Yeah. Cool. So let's just get with how did this all evolve? How did you guys meet? How did this podcast kind of begin?
So we met first year of school, first week, basically.
Yeah. At orientation, so the week before classes start at Iowa, we have a 1L orientation. So that's a first year law student orientation. And we had to go around the room and say something about ourselves that was interesting or unique, something like that.
Yeah.
And would you like to share the thing you said?
No, my thing, I don't eat with spoons.
Luke doesn't use spoons.
Only forks.
Yes.
So
yeah, I know. He doesn't use spoons.
We don't have to get into the weeds on that. But
you'll never get to the bottom of it. I've been trying for the last 3 years, and it's a never ending. But it stuck with me, and so I
think we have similar senses of humor.
We do. It's kind of absurdist, meme centric senses of humor, and so we kind of met each other during that. We were in the same orientation class, but we didn't really engage with each other too much right away. We actually started hanging out because we had a board game night at our friend Emmanuel's house. And I think the first night we played Monopoly, probably. Yeah. There's something real basic. Now we play a much, much better games than Monopoly. Monopoly's a bad game. That could be a whole episode of why Monopoly's bad. But so we started hanging out there, and we became closer and closer friends. I thought the stuff he was doing was very odd and funny and quirky, and so we just started getting along. We were neighbors in the library. We both had desks right next to each other in the library too. So that's kind of how we met.
Yeah, Ryan's like, hey, let's do a podcast about legal stuff, legal education.
Well, that was.
And I'm like, yeah, this was last summer, and I'm like, all right, so buy some mics and we can just start talking.
Yeah, I was like, so Luke, we should do a podcast. It's going to cost us each like a few $100 to get involved. He's like, yeah, all right, sure, yeah, whatever. So,
right.
So we got rolling pretty quick last semester, third year. Unfortunately, I wish we would have started earlier because it's been fun, and we've actually learned a lot. It's been really helpful for reviewing for the bar exam and things like that, which we'll have to take this coming summer in July, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So reviewing some topics that we haven't visited since our first year is really, really helpful for us.
Right.
So
yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, it's been like scholarly for us and just a good, free time killer, something to do.
Yeah. It's awesome how like easy it is to get into podcasting, where we're in that world now where it's you just buy some mics and you can throw it on the internet and anyone can listen to it. It's awesome. You don't have to like convince a radio show or a TV producer to back you or anything. It's great.
Yeah, I mean the startup costs, we got some nicer microphones, and you wouldn't even need the system we have. We have like a mixer and things like you can get just like a USB mic and go if you really wanted to. And the overhead costs, like if you want to like host it on a website or something. I don't know where you host yours through. Is it just on your website or like we have a Squarespace.
Okay.
So we just run everything through Squarespace, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
They have like unlimited uploads and things like that. Where places like Lisbon or Podbean, which are very popular as well, you can make a website through them, and you pay like a monthly fee for that. But with Squarespace, I think you pay for the whole Squarespace. You can make multiple websites, things like that, and they will host all your podcasts for you. So that's how we do ours.
And they have beautiful design templates.
Yeah. Yeah, let's plug Squarespace on that.
Right, yeah. Yeah, nice. I didn't realize that. I'm on Libsyn, but it's a little more like technical maybe I'd say, but it works out fine.
Yeah, we looked at them as well. They're really good. Squarespace just really fit with us. We were between those two, so not surprised you'd be with a really good group like them.
Good enough.
Sweet. Okay. So how many, I guess, so you guys where are you guys going to school right now?
We're at the University of Iowa. Yep. So we're in Iowa City. Yep.
Okay.
If nobody really knows where that is in Iowa, if you go straight west from Chicago for about 3.5 hours, you'll hit us.
Okay.
Yeah. just take I-80 just straight west. You will not miss us.
So, and then why did you guys both kind of decide to jump into law school?
For me, it was just sort of, I guess, the inevitable next step. I ended up taking the LSAT, and things turned out okay. And I'm like, sure.
You actually had a
you
had a roommate, right?
Yeah,
had an LSAT book, and
had some books hanging around, and so
I what is this?
Picked those up, and I took the test. I did the activities, and I took the test, and everything worked out.
Yeah, so he just randomly found an LSAT book, and he's like, yeah, all right, law school, yeah.
What? Okay.
There was a little more thought than that, but not much.
Right,
Luke is like super duper smart, so it's not terribly surprising that he would challenge himself and go to law school. I don't know if you're deciding between med school or veterinary school or law school, but you were. I mean, obviously,
got to go somewhere.
Yeah, you needed some postgraduate something. You're too smart not to. I went to. So I actually started out as a music major in undergrad, and I went to Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, which is just south of the border from Minnesota. And I love Decorah. It's beautiful. They have one of the top breweries like in the nation. And they have like beautiful springs and bluffs and waterfalls, like really just awesome. But I realized I could come back to Iowa City, which is where I'm from. I'm like stationed here. My family's here. Right. And I could graduate undergrad with no debt that way. Like, well, I can't really argue with no debt, right? Yeah. So I came back to Iowa, and I was like, all right, so I love music, but I don't know if I want to do it for my career. and I was like, oh well, I could see doing theater. I know I did a lot of acting, things like that in high school and undergrad, and so I joined the mock trial team because they needed characters for witnesses.
Right.
And I played, every single character in the case was like 20 characters or something, and I loved the whole process. And then they had me play a lawyer, and I was really good at it. And I still wasn't like sold on law school, but I kind of like sat down and had a come to Jesus moment where I just was like, what am I going to do next? And I was looking at what classes I'd taken that I liked, what I was doing really well in. I'm like, oh, my speaking classes and writing classes are like where I'm really excelling. And this lawyer thing seems kind of fun. So maybe this is what I should do. And so I kind of fell into it, and I love it. So I definitely, went to the right place and I'm doing the right thing. But law school is certainly not for everybody.
Most people who do it, it's kind of a similar story. It's just, I needed something, so law school worked out.
And that's really not a great reason to go to law school in hindsight. I was fortunate because I really like it, but I think a lot of people who have that's their reason for going to law school probably either don't like it or burn out pretty quickly, because it's a lot of work in a short amount of time. It's a 3-year program. Med school is longer, and then you have residency, and a PhD program is usually longer because you got to get your master's first and then write a dissertation. So it's stressful,
Yeah.
And the thing that I think separates law school from other graduate programs too is, I don't know how other schools do it, but at Iowa and at a lot of other top schools, you go to class for the semester, and then your entire grade for a class comes down to one test at the end of the semester, and it's all on a curve. And so even if everybody did A work, a certain number of people have to get A's, a certain number of people have to get B's, a certain number of people have to get C's, and a certain number of people have to get D's. And so everybody could do A work, and then you might still get a D. You have to do better than everybody else. And so it's just ranking everybody in a class against each other. And that's really stressful. You don't turn in any assignments. You don't get any class participation points really in class. You get a test, and it's all on a curve. And so your job prospects oftentimes, and that, Iowa has really, really good job placement. So that's great for us. But, your 1L summer is huge, because all they get are your first semester grades, basically, to decide whether they want to hire you. And your second summer, they just get your first year grades, and that's it. And that second summer might be the job you end up with after law school. So that's what it was for me. Is I was working in Des Moines, and they got my 1L grades, and they hired me, and I got an offer at the end of this past summer. And so if you don't do well your first year, you're probably still going to get a job, especially if you go to a school like Iowa. But it's stressful. You don't know. It's kind of up in the air. It's a very competitive field too.
Yeah.
And maybe you disagree.
It's a lot of pressure on the first year, especially. It's definitely the hardest. It's also the most fun and transformative, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
you only have to do it once. Is the good thing.
Yeah, it is. It's it's a lot of pressure, but it totally reshapes your mind. It's not at all like undergraduate. Every person around you is really, really smart and really prepared. Nobody's sitting in the back of the class like goofing off. And if they are, they change quickly because they will not succeed. So it's amazing being surrounded by everybody who's just brilliant. People with PhDs. We have a neurosurgeon in our class. We have somebody who worked for the Department of Defense, I think. Somebody has a master's in violin performance. There are other people with masters in urban planning. I mean, these are brilliant people that I'm surrounded. I did community theater, so good for me.
Right.
So it's really rewarding. It's a lot of work. It's stressful, but it's all worth it.
Yeah. Damn. Sounds tough, but yeah, rewarding, like you said. And then, so how does the bar exam work?
This is a good question. So there's it's part multiple choice and then part essay. So you pick a state where you want to take the exam.
Right.
about half the states now have a uniform exam. So, like if you take the test in Iowa, you can transfer that state to New York and District of Columbia.
Okay.
And, there's other states that are still holding out. So, like if you take the Florida bar, you can't transfer that score to other states. So, really just depends on where you want to practice.
Yeah. So the bar exam, I can't remember how many multiple choice questions it is.
I think it's 250, and those are about so your first year courses. That's the multiple choice. All the stuff you did first year.
So first year, our schedule first semester was property, torts, and contracts, and then like a legal writing class. And then second semester it was criminal law, civil procedure, which is just civil litigation stuff, and what was the other
Constitutional.
one? Constitutional law 1.
So that's all on the multiple choice. 250 questions of that.
Yeah, and the questions, I haven't done any practice bar questions yet, but in final exams, multiple choice questions like, a paragraph and then long questions. What's most likely the answer, or it's at least 2 of the above, or just.
It's 4 choices, and you have to pick the correct answer and then the correct reason why.
Yeah.
Oh.
So it's usually yes because A, yes because B, no because Y, and no because X, and you have to pick out the what and the why.
Yeah.
I see.
So you have like a 50-50 chance on the yes, no, and then you have to also understand why it's yes or why it's no. It's also a multi-day exam. It's 2 days for me.
The next day is essays.
So with the essays, at least some of the essays, what they do is they give you like a packet, and the packet is your library. And so you're given an assignment. It might be something like, a partner has assigned you this question you need to research, write a memo explaining how a judge is likely to rule on this issue. And so in the packet, you'll have some case law, you'll have some statutes, you'll have some other things. You'll have to, do the research quickly, get a basic understanding, and then write a memo for your partner explaining, how the judge is likely to rule based on this closed universe of information you've been given. That's one of them.
Yeah. A lot of the bar exam is just kind of rote memorization, being able to cram a lot of information, then recall it quickly. So just memorizing rules, and it takes about 2 months of study after you graduate, which we're both going to do.
And that's for somebody who's been through law school. It takes 2 months. So, it's a lot of work. If you've not been through law school, it certainly would take a lot longer than 2 months, I'm sure.
I think so.
Not just because you have to learn all the material, but like the way you think is just very different. The way you learn to write is very different.
Yes.
Not looking forward to it, but
on the other hand, in Iowa, at least first-time test takers, I think it's 85% or something pass the first time.
Yeah,
it's pretty high. So
if you prepare well, you're gonna do all right.
So they also have 3 big companies that give you bar prep stuff. You have Barbary, Themis, and Kaplan, and they're all good for different reasons. But Themis is the one that we both did because our friend is one of the representatives for Themis, and I think anybody who did 80% of the Themis work passed. Every single person passed on their first try.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
it's not hopeless.
Yeah, it's not hopeless. I think people have to remember too that the bar exam has to be written so anybody from any school can pass.
Yeah.
So
minimal competence.
A lot of people say it's a test of minimum competency, that as long as you're enough of a lawyer, you can pass. You don't have to be the best lawyer. You don't even have to be an average lawyer. You just have to be, the bare minimum a lawyer requires to pass the exam.
I see. And because it's really just passing that allows you to, get the license to operate, correct?
You pass the exam, and then they have like character and fitness. So they make sure that you haven't done any crime of moral turpitude. You haven't stolen anything.
Or I don't know if I have the book here somewhere, but we have this thing called the Guide for Professional Responsibility. A lot of professions have some sort of ethical code. So, they're going to go back through and make sure that we're not lawyers yet, so we can technically violate it, but you're not supposed to. Like if you lie on anything for any reason, the bar could sanction you or prevent you from becoming a lawyer.
Just don't do crimes.
Yeah, don't do stupid stuff.
Right.
Pretty good rule to live by, whether you're a lawyer or not, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Good to know. Okay, yeah, interesting. We have all heard these kind of, terms and heard about the stuff, but never knew the details. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, so what's kind of like for just kind of the normal person like me or anyone listening, like what's kind of the basis and like things that they should kind of know related to law or something that kind of pertains to everybody? I don't know. Do you know? Like, I'm just trying to get at like what are the basics?
What's the one thing we could tell somebody like you need to learn for any reason?
I think the most important thing would be to study your rights as far as criminal procedure.
I'd agree with that.
Your rights when you're pulled over or if you should ever be accused of a crime. Hopefully not.
Yeah, so you want to look at like 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment stuff, probably. Your right to privacy.
Your right to refuse a search if you're being searched. Your right to have an attorney and your right to be silent if you're ever being questioned. I think knowing those things is something that everyone should know because sooner or later everyone will probably be pulled over at least. And you should know your civil rights in that.
Well, and obviously the police are also a hot button topic. But for what it's worth, a police officer doesn't have to ask you whether you consent to a search. They can say, I need to search your car. And if you let them, that's consent. And so they can use language that's a little bit more forceful to obtain consent. And once you have consented, then the search is valid. There are some gray areas, of course, but just because they don't ask doesn't mean that you haven't necessarily consented. So it's really important to know, like, say, I do not consent. Say that explicitly. If you don't consent to the search, you certainly can consent. It's well within your rights to do that if you want to. Right. But like knowing, you have a right to know why they pulled you over. Yeah. You can't be held there without, I don't know if it's reasonable suspicion or probable cause or whatever, but these are things we have to go back and look at again because it's been well over a year since we've taken Crim Pro, and neither of us are practicing criminal law.
But there's a lot of good resources, like the ACLU produces.
Yes, the ACLU is fantastic. The American Bar Association has lots of stuff for lawyers and just basic overviews.
So I think finding actually accurate information about that is something everyone should do.
We're actually planning on doing an episode on this soon, but that area of the law is just really wishy-washy. It's a really unsatisfying area of the law. It's
pretty complicated.
I'm sure a lot of people who watch this or listen to this will know that we have a warrant requirement. Police are supposed to get a warrant. Well, that requirement isn't so much a requirement because there are so many exceptions to that warrant requirement. And so it's kind of up in the air whether there really is constitutionally a requirement that police officers get a warrant. I suppose it's the default. But there are so many circumstances, like with cars, for example, because they're mobile. If there's evidence in them, the police can still search the car because there's a chance that it might get away. They might lose evidence. And so that's an exception to the warrant requirement. Okay. So if it's a car, may not need a warrant. So there's just a lot of weird things like that we need to do a little bit more research on and be more prepared on before we can do the episode. So we're working on that right now because it's a really, really important area.
Yeah, that's something where, you kind of need to know, like, take the time to go learn about it right now because that moment's going to be hit on you without any warning. Like, it's just going to come up and you're going to need to know your rights and everything like that. Whereas something else, you may be able to, you would have the time to hopefully at least look up and get some answers or talk to somebody.
Well, that's exactly right.
And if God forbid something did happen, obviously contact an attorney. That's the most important thing you should do. There are lots of attorneys that can give you just a consultation. They'll do a free consultation before you have to hire them sometimes. You can just go talk to them about a conversation. This is what happened. Here's what I'm concerned about. And they'll be able to give you some feedback. And obviously contacting an attorney in your jurisdiction who knows local rules and knows the police in your area is going to be a lot more helpful than talking to us about it. but
got to look into it. Yeah, everyone needs to.
There are backstops too, right? So if it was a bad search, if it was an invalid search, then there are evidentiary rules that will throw the evidence out, even if they find something. So it's not too late if something happens with the police.
Right.
They may not be able to bring it in court or use it against you. So that's why it's important, even if you don't know your rights up front, to go find your rights out after the fact as well and speak to an
Mhm.
attorney, because you might be able to figure something out afterwards.
Yes. That's good.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any, I don't know, tips or advice for hiring an attorney? Because that feels like it's sort of like hiring a mechanic, right? Where you don't really know. It's tough because they're specialized in something that you're not familiar with. So it's like, how can a normal person kind of judge their level of competency and, find someone where they're not getting ripped off and everything like that?
Sure.
That's an interesting one because I've actually really never needed a lawyer. It's kind of weird that I want to be one, but I've never really needed one. As opposed to like people who want to be doctors. You've been to the doctor before. You're familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say if you have friends who have ever needed those services, I think that's probably the single best way.
Yeah, if you can get a referral from somebody that you trust.
Yeah.
So if like your parent has used an attorney and they've had good experience with an attorney, that's going to go a long way, because it's a personal account. If somebody had a bad experience with an attorney, they will tell you, because lawyers are not well liked to begin with, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, the first thing you should do is maybe ask around to people who you trust to see if either they know anybody who they trust or have worked with anybody. After that, I mean, there are obviously, you could look online for lawyers in the area, and you just have to look for a lawyer who specializes in the thing you're looking for, because lawyers do not practice broadly unless they're like a solo practitioner who just does a little bit of everything. So for example, I'm working for a corporate law firm, and I'm working in one or two practice areas. I'm going to be doing employment law and litigation. And litigation is just like, going to court over civil stuff, not criminal stuff. Mm-hmm. So if you need a criminal attorney, you're not going to come to me. If you need a will written, not going to come to me. Yeah. I can refer you to somebody I know or somebody in our firm, but not going to come to me. So, it's important to kind of search through. You don't contact a probate attorney or a real estate attorney if you have a criminal matter. Find a criminal defense attorney,
Yeah, specialists, and I think most lawyers are the utmost professional. I think they're all pretty all right.
Yeah, I mean,
there's bad apples, of course.
Yes,
we see them in the news all the time.
Yeah, that's the thing.
So I think you could trust most attorneys, but definitely, yeah, your friends will know best.
Yeah, I mean, you could all obviously Google them and see if something weird comes up. Sometimes that can happen as well. Like you could, maybe they were arrested for something and they've been sanctioned by their own bar. I mean, you could just Google their name and see like X name attorney and then city, and then see if something bad comes up about them, and that might be some extra work you could do to protect yourself.
Right. Yeah, that's good. That makes sense. So what do you think are some maybe misconceptions that people generally have about the law, that maybe they're misinformed on something?
I think one thing is the thing we talked about earlier, which is law versus policy.
Yes.
So law is made largely in the courts, right? Or interpreted there. Mm-hmm. And, courts are by their nature apolitical, they're neutral. If you want to shape policy or tell the court what rules it has to follow, that's something you do, with lobbying and voting. But separating law from policy, I think, is a big thing. And what we're talking about in law school, and I think on our podcast largely, is what it is and maybe why it got that way, not necessarily what it should be.
Yeah, I think Luke's right that that's one of the biggest misconceptions about discussions about the law. People will conflate a legal argument with a policy argument, and they're not the same thing. And it's even hard for a first-year law student to be able to separate the difference between the two. If it's kind of a moral question, it's probably a policy question. It's like, what should the law be is not a legal question. The legal question is, the law says X. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. And so the courts, I'm a little bit more cynical than Luke. I think the courts can be political depending on what level you're at. And I think he would probably agree with that to a certain extent.
They definitely can.
Well, because judges are appointed by political, But yeah, even the Supreme Court, they talk about having conservative justices and liberal justices. But what they're doing is they're interpreting a document in a way that has political ramifications. It's not necessarily politically motivated, right? So, for example, Justice Scalia, the late Justice Scalia, was well known for being both a textualist, so he would read the text and just say, well, the text has a plain meaning, right? So we should just read it like it says. But he also was well known for being an originalist, which means that he would go back to, the founding or even pre-founding, back to English courts, and look at what the law meant back then, and then use that as his interpretive guide. And just based on that, how he interpreted the law ended up having kind of a conservative outcome. But it wasn't like, I feel this way about a policy, and so I'm going to interpret the law so it fits my political beliefs. It's just like, here's how I think the law ought to be interpreted. Whatever the consequences are relevant, because Congress can change the law, right? Mm-hmm. If they don't like my interpretation, they can go change it.
Right.
That's totally within their power. But this is how I think we should interpret it, and that has consequences. And those consequences are what make things political. So I think people really conflate, especially with the Supreme Court, things being politically motivated, when I don't think the justices are nearly as politically motivated as people think they are. I think they're just interpreting the law in the way they see fit, and depending on how you interpret it, could have a more liberal outcomes or more conservative outcomes. And I think people should really understand that.
I see. So it's kind of like, this is the way it's written. This is like what the law and rules that we're operating under, and this is how we're interpreting it. Like if like that's what you guys are operating under, but then changing that is a total separate thing.
Yeah, that's all policy. What should the law be?
And it's not that lawyers can't shape policy. They certainly can. Yeah. I mean, lawyers can work in politics. They can influence politics. And there's a whole field of law, critical studies, which says that the law is, fundamentally flawed, which, you can empathize with, because our legal system was written, based largely in medieval England, right? I mean, that's where it started.
It's common law. It goes back from courts and writs from the 1500s.
So, there's very legitimate criticisms about, what the law is and how it can be shaped and altered so that basically it's more fair, it's more just. And
some justifications for laws go away when society changes, right?
Definitely.
So if, for example, this isn't a great example, copyright has changed a lot over the last century, because we have large corporations who want greater protections, like Disney. So, for example, copyright protections at one time only lasted 12 years. Now they last like the life of the creator plus 70 years.
Right.
Part of that is because there's a lot more money in it, and we want to encourage innovative ideas. And if you only get 12 years protection, maybe people won't be as incentivized to create new big things because they won't get as much money from them. And so we lengthen them so Disney can own, Marvel and make a new Marvel movie and have a lot of money generated from that and be able to reap the benefits of their really expensive creation. We've chosen that as a policy.
Yeah.
And that's fine. And so we've shaped the law in a way that guides that policy. We said copyright protections need to be longer. But, the copyright protections just are what they are. They say, life of the author plus 70 years or whatever it is. And that's just the law. The outcome is what we want it to be. And so we can change it. So the justifications for having shorter copyright protections have gone away, and society has changed. And so we have changed the law in accordance with it.
Right.
So we have laws that are probably dated, that don't make any sense anymore.
Absolutely.
And so, our legislators should work to adapt the law to modern society. So I think that's probably where the crossover between law and politics is obviously there's a lot of interplay. It's like Congress needs to change laws to reflect our core values and our policy positions. But again, the law is what it is. So yeah, when you're a judge or you're a lawyer, you're just arguing for what the law is, and your interpretation of it as it stands. whether it should be changed is a political issue.
Right. Yeah. So do you guys have any, this is something that everyone's going to have to inevitably deal with, whether it's like a lease contract or anything like that. Do you have any like help or tips or recommendations for people when they're kind of with contracts and reading through those and you know, any, I don't know, just any tips with that stuff?
Yeah, it's so hard. Obviously, we can't get specific with anyone's situation. But
yeah, because we can't give legal advice. But also we don't have the copy of the thing in front of us.
I think this is another one where it's good to reach out to a lot of those free resources. There's a lot of tenants' rights projects in most places. There are, if you can afford an attorney, obviously it might be good to get an attorney, even for an apartment lease.
It's probably worth, I think one thing that is maybe advisable is look at your landlord-tenant ordinances where you live.
Yeah, both your state law and then whatever rules there are in your city.
Yeah, so for example, I think Coralville has a max on late fees for rent. Like, I think it can only be like $20 a day. And so if you have a landlord who's charging you $40 a day, they probably can't do that. And so if you looked at your ordinances, you would know whether one, it can be overridden by a contract. That's certainly possible. But also what is reasonable in your area. If your landlord is saying, well, I'm going to do X, but the law says they can only do up to Y, just say, well, I would like to change this provision in my contract to make it consistent with this ordinance.
Yeah.
And if you have it, then what's the landlord going to do?
There's just a wealth of that. The internet is great for this, I think, as long as you're looking at accurate primary sources. So if you're actually going to, your state,
your government
website, don't trust any charlatan, obviously.
Yeah.
So you gotta be kind of discerning about that. But I think taking advantage of those free resources is definitely something you should do with just everyday things like leases and car insurance, maybe the little things you deal with every day.
We had our episode 10 was about gym memberships. Well, it wasn't about gym memberships. It was about New Year's resolutions, but gym memberships is obviously one of the big ones, right? And there was one in Michigan, and the gym, I think, was trying to collect $5,000 or something in membership fees or something.
It was pretty unconscionable, cancellation fees.
Yeah, they had really high cancellation fees, and they were trying to collect on the full contract, even though people backed out. And so we were kind of talking about maybe read through the gym membership policy to see if it's worth signing up, maybe just pay the daily fee. And, maybe compare to other gyms in the area what they're offering to see if they're being reasonable. Reading through your contracts very carefully is important, even if it seems like it's something innocuous, like a gym membership. Why wouldn't I trust this gym? They have a bunch of customers, lots of people come here, they do classes, whatever. They seem reputable, seems fine. They might have just changed their contracts last week. Who knows? Everybody else might be under a different contract. It's good to just make sure you sit down, read through it. If you need help, obviously you can contact somebody. You can ask them to explain it to you. I'm sure that they'd be happy to try and do that. But with landlord-tenant stuff or gym memberships, check your government websites for just local rules and those things. Sometimes they have just basic, frequently asked questions pages. So like, what are tenants asking? Well, here's the top 10 questions tenants are worried about. Here's where you find them.
Nice.
That's what I would do.
Cool. Yeah, and that's something I feel like a lot of people are like intimidated by, is just like the language of a contract, where it's very different from how we normally speak. Why is that? Is that just, go ahead?
Well, a lot of the times it's intentional, and it's not intended to confuse you necessarily. It's intended to be written very carefully, because over time, over 100 years of contract law, they've discovered certain language works in a certain way and will be interpreted in a certain way.
Yeah, and also, it could also be it could be bad lawyering.
It very much can be just bad writing.
And what sometimes happens, so we have legal databases that give us a lot of research tools. One's called Westlaw, one's called LexisNexis, and they have like form contracts online. So it's just like, here's a pre-written contract that has all the provisions you want, and just fill in the company's name and their address and the dates, and make little edits here and there as you like. And on there they have like really pro company forms and really pro customer forms, and you can choose what you want. And so it may very well be that either A, the lawyer who wrote it for them is using a form contract, either from one of those legal databases or from their firm. Law firms often, especially if you have a lawyer who's been doing practice for a long time and who's written a lot of contracts like this, they're probably modeling their contract on another contract they've already written for somebody else that they've had success with. So it might be that they didn't look through it super carefully. Or, like Luke said, it could be they looked through it very, very, very carefully, and they're trying to cover their tracks. They don't want people to confuse it, because God forbid it ends up in litigation, you end up in court about it. We want it to be abundantly clear what we don't mean, And so it's really lengthy and wordy to exclude all sorts of different possibilities.
Yeah, sorry it's that way.
Ambiguity.
Part of being in society, I guess.
Ambiguity is not good. You don't want to chance your contracts in court. You lose a lot of money. So you just got to write it really densely and thoroughly to make sure you've covered all your bases.
Yeah.
Yep.
Unfortunately, it's not the most fun thing to read or go through, but it is necessary, I guess.
There is a bit of a movement. I don't know who you had for LAWR 1, but I had Professor Sheeran, and Professor Sheeran was talking to us about trying to move away from legalese into more concise, clear writing. So I know still today, and especially in Iowa, we have a lot of filings to the court which start off with like, whereas, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And wherefore, blah, blah, blah. And you use a lot of, such as, blah, blah, blah. Just a lot of legal jargon that's unnecessary. Yeah. So I think there is a push to try and make legal documents a little bit clearer so people who aren't lawyers can more readily understand them. And so they're just easier for judges and other people to read. We don't need things from the 18th century or 19th century in our writing just because it's tradition.
Yeah.
Just because we've always done something isn't a good reason to keep doing it. There's got to be a good reason for it now.
Yeah.
And so some of these contracts could just be old too. They're dated and just need to be updated.
Right. That makes sense with this, all this stuff being so old that kind of language just hangs on in there. So do you guys have any like particular cases or stories or anything from, that you've learned in school or just something that comes to mind that are kind of interesting or fun, like the kid getting hit in the leg or anything like that?
Yeah, they tend to give us the memorable ones or the funny ones.
Yes.
My favorite ones are any cases that involve animals. The reason is because it's usually people, it's almost always people fighting over animals, and the animals have no idea what's going on.
They're just animals. There's this big legal dispute about the animals, and they're just, out in the field doing their thing.
Like, whatever, yeah.
And people are just super mad about these animals and who owns them or what to do with them. And there are some, like the one with the cow catcher with the train, for example.
That's right.
So trains along to steam engines used to often run into cows, and that was not good for the trains or the cows owners, right? and so there were a lot of cases about what to do about these trains hitting all these cows, and this is a torts issue, and so they came up with this thing called, was it the cost justified?
Yeah, it's cost
least cost avoider, right?
So who can best avoid hitting cows? Who's in the best position? We could fence in the entire length of the railroad tracks, and someone has to pay for that.
We could fence in the land the cows are on,
or we could have trains run slower.
Or we could put a cow catcher on the front.
And what's the cheapest of those? It's having trains, operate a little more safely, which means.
So they put, the images of trains that have like the pointed thing on the front of them with the little grates. Well, so the trains are operating more safely, but God forbid they do hit a cow. What that was supposed to do was hit the cow and then push it off to the side and not keep it on the track. So, so that was one of the things they came up with. So trains weren't getting hurt so badly, but also hopefully, if they're driving slower and operating better, the cows aren't running onto the tracks in the first place.
Right.
So it's just weird stuff like that. There's a case about chicken meat. There's this big case called it's a frugaliment.
It's a popular one. It's about contracts and what is the meaning of chicken is the issue.
They bought a bunch of chicken meat, and they have like different grades of chicken meat.
There's old chickens, new chickens.
There's stewing chicken.
Yeah.
And so like low quality chicken would be used for stewing, and then there's like young chickens which would be used for, I don't know,
frying.
Frying chicken. And so
Right.
they ordered chicken, and they sent a particular grade of chicken, and the company who
low quality
got the low quality chicken was upset about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they sued to define what chicken meant in the contract to see if what they sent was reasonable, if it was a proper chicken delivery. So that's another one. There's also a case with other chickens. It's the suicide chicken case.
That's a good one.
So there is a case where it was about airspace and nuisance. So it was back during, I think, World War II.
Yeah.
World War I or World War II.
Two.
And this chicken farm lived near an airstrip. It was out in a field. And the planes kept flying really, really low over this chicken farm, like 70 feet above the tops of the trees. Yeah, real low. And it would freak the chickens out, and they would jump up into the side of the barn and die because the sound was so loud. And so the farmer sued the airline. I don't remember if it's the airline or
it was the government.
It was the government for airspace because the planes were allowed to fly that low, and he was saying, well, I can't make use of the land that I bought because of your stupid, air policy. Planes should have to fly higher or be quieter so I can use the land for what I want to do. I should be able to quietly enjoy my land. Yeah. I want to raise chickens. This was my income. I can no longer do this. So you either have to recoup my losses and pay me because you've prevented me from using my land for that purpose, or change your law. And I think, well, they raised the airspace traveling, but I think they also probably just paid him for his damages.
Just paid him off. But, how much of the air were they encroaching on? And then what were his chickens worth? So those are funny things to deal with.
There's also a really famous case of the fox. There's two big cases. The very first case, this is what our very first episode was about. It's called Pearson v. Post. And it was about, the first one is about two guys who were hunting a fox, and one guy was pursuing the fox, and another guy came along and basically took the fox from him. He made the kill, took the fox, and the guy who was pursuing was like, hey, that was my fox. And the other guy's like, no, I killed the fox. It's my fox. And so they go all the way up to the Supreme Court of New York, which at the time was the highest court in New York, about who gets this $25 pelt, basically. And basically, I think the rule of law was that you have to have either mortally wounded the fox. So if you have deprived the fox of its liberty, then you get the fox. So if you have mortally wounded it, you continue pursuing the fox, then it's yours.
Otherwise, you can come and take it.
If somebody mortally wounds the fox and then just leaves it, they've abandoned it, and then the other person can get it. Now we just have laws on this issue. There's another fox case too. I don't know why we had so many fox cases, but there was this one about this pet fox. It was a silver fox. It was named Mackenzie Duncan. It had a name. It was like a family pet.
Right.
And it was silver, so it wasn't like a fox you would see locally. Regular foxes are orange or red or whatever. And the fox came onto somebody's land. Presumably, they were trying to protect their chickens again, and they killed the fox. And the question was that okay? Should they have killed the fox, or should they have known better because it wasn't like a typical fox? Should they have known that it was a family pet because it wasn't like all the other ones? Right. The answer was yes. They should have known. They shouldn't have killed the fox. It's so distinct and so unique that they should have known that it probably escaped somebody's yard or something. It would be like if you're in Iowa or Nebraska and you saw a giraffe running through your cornfield. Like you wouldn't shoot the giraffe. It's not a deer. It's not a duck. It's you should know that a giraffe in Iowa or Nebraska has escaped somewhere. You should probably call animal control or like a zoo and be like, hey, I found your giraffe. So the fox was akin to a giraffe, according to the court, basically. It was so unique they should have known. There's lots of Yeah, lots of interesting cases. Like there's also the hairy hand case.
Yeah, everyone likes the hairy hand case.
Yeah, so that one. What is the movie that's?
So a lot of people have seen the movie The Paper Chase. It's from the 70s.
It's like one of the most famous legal movies
Harvard
ever.
Law School.
It's like My Cousin Vinny and The Paper Chase.
And they're intimidating the students on the first day of contracts class, and it's the stodgy old contracts professor, and he's talking about the case Hawkins versus McGee, which is where a doctor promised to give a kid a skin graft so
on his hand
could fix his hand, and he took the skin from his chest because he didn't really know how to do a proper skin graft.
This was like 1908 or 14. It was like skin grafting was new. Early. And he promised the kid, I'll do the skin graft, and I promise you a perfectly good hand.
And they did the skin graft, and he not only didn't get a perfectly good hand, he had a mangled and hairy hand.
So the skin from the kid's chest started growing hair on the palm of the kid's hand. Jeez. So that was it was not a perfectly good hand.
Yes.
So he broke his contract.
He broke the contract. It was an enforceable promise because that's all contracts are, just legally enforceable promises. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure they probably got damages or something.
Yeah.
I don't remember. But when we're talking about contracts cases and stuff from our first year, we don't really worry about the damages or whatever happens. We just learn that like a promise is enforceable in the law. And here's something that people don't often know is that a lot of times oral contracts really are enforceable. You don't always have to have everything in writing. Okay. It's probably advisable to put it in writing, but there are only a handful of things that have to be in writing.
I see.
There's this thing called the statute of frauds, and it basically says there are MYLEG.
Yeah,
like six things
if you want
to be in writing.
Like a real estate contract, you have to write down, but
marriage.
Right, marriage. But a contract to paint your house, you can contract to paint your house. You don't have to write it.
Yeah, it could be oral, and you could take it to court, and you could still win as an enforceable promise. Huh. So that's another thing people don't realize is that when you make oral contracts, they can be legally enforceable even if they're not in writing. Not putting it in writing is not a defense. Or putting it in writing in a bar on a napkin.
There you go. That's a good one.
That's another case.
They wrote down Lucy versus Zemer, and it was in the 1950s in Virginia, and it was around Christmas time, and they got to drinking and arguing, and the owner of the farm, he said it was like a troll. He wrote down, "I will sell you my farm for $50,000 or whatever," and he wrote it on a bar napkin or a receipt, something like that, a scrap of paper, and that was an enforceable sales contract for the farm.
Yeah, so they had to sell the farm, and he'd been drinking, and he wrote it on a bar napkin or on a receipt or something, and it was enforceable contract. Man. So it's crazy stuff can happen, and there's lots of really colorful cases in our textbook. There are also really horribly dry cases like International Shoe. And,
most are pretty boring.
Yeah, you have some stupid procedural matter. It's like, is there corporate jurisdiction? Who cares? But these like property cases, these old property cases and contracts cases are all super colorful and really, really fun. Yeah.
Right on. Yeah, that thing about the trains hitting the cows. I went to Iceland on a 2-week kind of road trip. We rented this van and went around there, and the guy warned us because there's this. They have like they call them like suicidal sheep, and they just kind of like all these sheep are along the side of the road. Right. And then just as you drive up, the sound of they can't really see very well because all like the sheep, holes in their eyes and stuff. And as you drive up, the sound from the car will freak them out sometimes. So they'll just jump, and sometimes they'll jump right into the road. So it looks like they're just committing suicide right in front of your car, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And apparently it's such an issue that they have like established, I don't know, whatever they did. But the guy's like, just slow down, because if you do hit a sheep, you have to, report it to the landowner, the sheep owner, and give him like $50 for every sheep you kill or something. But they had like a whole, procedure in place for that.
Yes, yeah. Someone in the Icelandic parliament had to deal with that.
Yeah.
Is it Iceland that is the world's oldest continuing democracy? I'm fairly certain that
might be.
Yeah, I think they've had like the world's oldest continuous democracy. It's like 900 years or something.
Yeah, we should go.
Whoa.
Yeah. It's either Iceland or Greenland, but I think it's Iceland. I think Iceland is the one.
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously, different countries can come to different conclusions on what they should do in a situation like the trains or the sheep. And obviously, if you put a burden on the driver of the cars to have to pay $50, well, it's going to be, first of all, it's going to be hard to enforce, right? If you hit a sheep and it doesn't do any damage to your car, you could drive away, which is not what you should do, but what's the owner going to do? They're not going to be able to track you down unless there's cameras or somebody else saw you. Or you can place the burden and, a good citizen will have to pay the $50 and they don't want to do that. So they'll just drive a lot slower because it's not worth having to stop what they're doing in the middle of the day, find the owner, say I hit a sheep, find a check, find cash, or use Venmo or the Cash App or whatever,
right?
And give $50. It's just not worth their time, and so drivers will go slow. That's one. See, that's another way that law can shape policy, right? Is that torts in particular, what we do with the tort law, which is like the trains, it's like assaults, batteries, negligence, that's all tort law. If you place a burden on one party, it's going to affect that party. And that burden can be money or it can be risk. If you place risk on a party, they're more likely to try and mitigate the risk. So,
right.
If a manufacturer, like there's a bunch of cases with Coca-Cola bottles that explode. If it's the manufacturer's fault, if any of that happens and it injures a person, the manufacturer is going to take, precaution to ensure that doesn't happen if they have to pay out every single time. And that sort of stuff comes from tort law. And so that shapes policy. We can use tort law to shape what we want people to do. So that's kind of cool too. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the case of like, the Fox one where they killed the fox that was the kind of like the family pet, was that, so like, how is that solution? How does that come about? Because that seems like such a special case that would a policy be written or something about that? Or is that just kind of a one-time thing in a court?
Well, so that's the difference between common law and civil law, right?
Right. So we have a system, it's called the common law system, right? So it's descended from Old England, and the legislature or the parliament or whatever can make rules. So they could, in theory, make rules about how to handle, shooting someone's pet fox. But they're probably not going to do that.
Yeah, they don't have time. They're not going to think to cover every base.
So instead, what we have is a system where you can take your case to court, and a judge, assuming it's a legal issue they can decide on, they'll just come up with a decision. And then that will control every similar pet fox case in that state, right?
I see.
And it will influence pet fox cases in other states.
Yeah.
Now, if there's a different set of facts, like if it was a regular looking fox, then we can say, well, this case is different from that old one, and
try and distinguish it we'll
make new rules,
a legitimate reason.
But
and back in the day, we had courts of law and courts of equity, and so this is before, like well, I guess that was in the United States for a while, right?
Yeah.
So a court of law would, if you had a legal remedy, so if you had money damages, if that was available to you through the law, you could pursue that. But if you didn't have a legal remedy, you would go to the court of equity, and they would come up with like what's fair, basically. They try to come up with a fair resolution. There's not necessarily law guiding them, but they find some way to make the parties feel at ease, either return them to their previous position or take what the other one gained by virtue of their wrong, things like that.
But yeah, our system does allow you to, if there's not a rule that exists, you can take it to a judge, and the judge can just sort of make one up.
Yeah, they can. The judges have that power.
Easy enough.
Other countries have civil law codes. So, we come from the common law. We have that flexibility to just say, well, this fox thing has never happened before, so we'll come up with a rule. But I think France has civil law, and they write a code trying to cover everything. So it's really long and really dense. And I don't remember, I think what they do instead of, if something random comes up like that, they still decide it with like a judge, but I think then they write a statute in light of that.
Yeah, the difference is that one big difference is that a case that happens in a civil law system, this is like the continent of Europe as opposed to Great Britain. In those kind of systems, one case decided in a particular way on one occasion doesn't influence future cases. So they can come out in a different way. Yeah, as opposed to our Pet Fox case, where that's a pretty famous rule. That's probably going to be the rule in any situation where a similar thing would come up.
Yeah, so I guess the way to kind of think about it is, in common law, you set a precedent when you decide a case, and that precedent exists forever until Congress comes in and writes a law because they're like, we don't like this precedent or something. Then they can change it if they want to, but judges create precedent, and then that becomes the common law rule. That, there might not be a statute on it, but we have this case that set this rule, so we're going to rely on it. In civil law, no precedent. Yeah. It's just whatever happens to be in the judge's mind that day, I guess. If there's not a statute on it. Yeah. So we like our common law system. There are pros and cons, obviously. Again, you can have like really old rules that have been the rules for like 200 years, and it's precedent. It's not really helpful today, but we still have this rule, and so then we have to go back and think about whether it's the right rule to follow today, and then worry about judges, creating totally new laws arbitrarily, which is not so good. We don't want ideally we want judges interpreting laws, right, and finding resolutions. We don't really want them legislating from the bench either, right?
Yeah.
We don't want them making policy because they feel like it. We want them to follow precedent as best they can, and then the legislature can be like, oh, hey, do you see this case? Let's go do something about that. If judges are legislating, then we don't have separation of powers, right? We have our three branches. Yeah. We want to keep them separate from each other.
Yep. Yeah. Wow. Damn. This is incredibly complex, but it's
yeah. It's why we go to law school, and
it's boring, but it's not too boring.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
It can be fun. It's not for everybody, but it's our cup of tea.
Yeah, there's the glimpses of sunshine in there, huh?
Yeah. Well, for every terrible outcome you get in a case, you also get some really good outcomes too, right?
Yeah.
There are cases that there are cases where somebody gets totally screwed over, and then there are cases where you stick it to the big guy, and the little guy comes out on top. So for every cynical thing we can come up with, and every concern we can point out, there's a lot of justice in what we're doing, and being able to see kind of how beautiful our system is, and see the great outcomes and the really thoughtful opinions from people who spent their lives studying the law and thinking about these problems, writing a long opinion from the Supreme Court. It's amazing to see the type of work that people are doing. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I guess you could say Roberts in the Obamacare case, and it's just so fascinating to see how brilliant these people are. So we have a lot of appreciation for it, having gone through it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Man, well, yeah, I appreciate you guys, taking the time and kind of sharing that stuff. It's super fascinating, interesting. I love it.
Well, we appreciate you sitting through all of it, because sometimes people will talk to people about this stuff and they'll just kind of nod politely, smile. And we know that that's our life now. My fiance is over in the other room, and she has to hear us talk about this stuff all the time, and she puts up with us. Right. We actually got her a book. I don't know if I still have it in here, but it was a book. It was a book that tells you how to live with a law student their first year. It's like, here's what you're going to expect. Here's how they're going to behave differently. Here's the type of pressure they're going to be under, and here's why that's going to suck for you, but it's going to be okay.
Yes. Not that we do have personalities outside of school.
Yes, and we try to fan those personalities as best we can. But certainly, once you're in law school, it becomes a huge part of who you are. Yeah, and you can't go back.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like there's kind of a big stigma to it, where people won't even try to like learn about it, even or like they're just like, that's over my head. I don't even care about it, But it's really, if you can just sit for a little bit and have a little bit of patience, it's very doable.
Yeah, it's comprehensible.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially our second and third episodes where we did the due process stuff and the equal protection stuff, that's stuff people really need to know. And it, some of it might be complicated and it might challenge you a little bit, but this is like monumental foundational stuff that makes our country what it is. Yeah. And these systems that affect your lives every single day. And I think we have a duty as Americans and as civically engaged citizens to know some of these foundational, especially constitutional principles. And so I think it's worth people's time to sit down and listen and learn. I think it's worth people's time to get involved and ask questions and try and learn about the society we live in, because there are a lot of problems. And when you learn things about the law, you can learn about why some solutions are good or bad. You know, it's those foundational things, those legal ideas that give you a leg to stand on when you take a position on something.
Yeah.
So we hope that, you know, anybody who watches this video will check out our podcast. Obviously, you know, comment and send us suggestions. If you have questions and you want us to do some research on something, email us. We'd love to do that. You know, if somebody has an area of the law, they're like, what is this? Why does this work the way that it does? You know, the government shutdown. Who is that affecting? Why does that matter? What needs to happen for that to change? Email us, notsuspiciousmedia@gmail.com. Go to our website, www.notsuspiciousmedia.com. And we'd love to engage with whoever and try and uncover these answers, not only for them, but for ourselves too, because we want to know.
If you have a legal problem, though, go to a lawyer.
We're not lawyers. We're not going to give you legal advice, but we'll give you broad overviews of things and like give you just hopefully as objective as we can be understanding of, you know, the system and the general rule, qualified with this is not legal advice. If you have questions about your specific situation, talk to an attorney. It's the very first thing in every episode. The following podcast is not legal advice. If you or someone you know is seeking legal advice, contact a local attorney. Yeah.
Gotta say it. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Right on. Well, thanks, guys. Yeah, I'll throw links to all that stuff, your website and your email and everything. Do you guys have any social accounts or anything like that?
Yeah, we have a Facebook account. You can follow us at CEID Podcast, SEEID Podcast, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. I'm pretty sure it's all at CEID Podcast. And then we also have Not Suspicious Media, which is our umbrella for all the other things. We have a few other projects we're working on. So our friend Mike Sylvester writes a movie review blog called The Real Movie Reviewer. He's putting stuff out every week. He just did one on the Golden Globes and one on, I think, the Oscars that the nomination just came out, and on movie Vice. We have another movie review podcast called The Off Screen Review. They've got about 4 episodes. Elijah and Rachel are pretty busy right now. They're both theater students at the University of Iowa, and they're in shows right now. So they're kind of trying to balance their academic life with their podcast life. They're going to be getting back to it. And then my fiance, Victoria, also has a podcast called The Hot Seat. Or no, it's called Turn Up the Heat. It was going to be called The Hot Seat. It's called Turn Up the Heat. And, well, the tag is that you get put in the hot seat. So the premise is that she invites a guest on, and they don't know what they're going to be asked. And they're asked, you know, questions on the spot about a political topic or something, and they give their opinion. Oh, okay. We don't criticize. She gives some pushback just to kind of probe why people think how they do and why they feel the way they do. But everybody comes on voluntarily. We're not like chaining people to a chair, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So all that's up on our website, notsuspiciousmedia.com. So you can check all that out there. You can listen to all the podcasts and read the reviews the blogs on our website, as well as on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, Planet Pod, whatever. So reach out to us at all of our social media accounts, and we can email you some of those links so you can share them as well.
Sweet. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
And thank you so much, Travis, for having us on. We really enjoy your podcast, and we hope that you continue doing great things. We'll keep in touch with you, and maybe we can check back in sometime in the future.
Yeah, let's do it. That'd be great. Thanks, guys.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Have a good one. All right.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.